Good morning and welcome to the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. In today's evidence session, we're going to be looking at housing associations with a focus on finance of new housing, issues that housing associations are facing with building, and big task of affordable housing. Could our witnesses first please introduce yourself? I'll start from Martyn at the front here.
Good morning. My name is Martyn Gimber. I'm the Chief Executive of North Devon Homes.
Good morning, I'm Kate Henderson. I'm Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation. We represent not-for-profit housing associations in England.
Good morning, I'm Holly Dagnall. I'm the Director of Homes and Wellbeing for Nottingham Community Housing Association.
Good morning, I'm Fiona Fletcher-Smith and I'm Chief Executive of the L&Q Group, and I also chair the London G15 Housing Group, which is the 11 confusingly largest housing associations in London.
Thank you. Can I just ask my committee colleagues to introduce themselves and if they have any declarable interest on this item? Lewis.
Lewis Cocking, Member of Parliament for Roxbourne. I live in a shared ownership property with a housing association.
Lee Dillon, the MP for Newbury, and my wife works for a housing association.
Will Forster, Woking.
Mayor Ellis, Ribble Valley.
Florence Eshalomi, I'm the chair of the committee.
Joe Powell, Kensington and Bayswater.
Nashaba Khan, Gillingham and Rainham.
Sarah Smith, Hyndburn.
Chris Curtis, Milton Keynes North.
Thank you very much. Now, as housing associations, I know that you are dealing with millions of residents up and down the country. And one of the issues, obviously, is around your relationship with house builders in terms of building new stock and maintaining some of the existing stock you have. Just as an opener question to all of you, and I'll start with Fiona, what proportion of your spending would you say is dedicated to house building as opposed to maintaining the existing stock that your respective associations hold?
Thank you. What I would say is it has shifted considerably over the past 5 years. So most of the spending that organisations like L&Q do is on existing homes, and that's a combination of routine maintenance, day-to-day maintenance, and also planned maintenance, so replacing roofs, windows, doors, achieving decent home standards, and also trying to move towards net zero. So you're seeing that shift. The issue in terms of actual numbers would be, though, the development process is very expensive. So I carry at L&Q about £5 billion worth of borrowing, which is predominantly for new development. And that has changed over the last 20 years because of reducing grant levels, where we used to have a 50-50 split of subsidy from our own organisation that would go into new build with 50% coming from government subsidy. That moved over a period of about 20 years to about 78% of it now is from private borrowing, and the remainder is made up by government grants. 78% is of development processes funded directly by local authority, housing associations in London.
Similar picture, we're a lot smaller organisation obviously than L&Q. We have just over 10,000 homes, but about 20% of our income is spent on maintenance. We do have quite an ambitious development programme for a relatively small to medium organisation, but a similar shift. So our development costs have gone up by about 34%. So we are now borrowing about £140,000 on average per home, with a grant rate of about £65,000 a home. So it's, it's kind of, we're borrowing more than double of our grant rates on new homes. So yeah, I mean it's a similar picture for us in the East Midlands to London in that regard.
What are your members saying?
Yeah, I think just first overall, really welcome working with you as a new committee, and particularly this focus on the role of housing associations in helping meet government's ambitions for 1.5 million homes. That is a big, bold, stretching target, and I think housing associations can and want to play a really central role in that. if we look at the figures for last year, housing associations delivered 1 in 4 of new homes in England. We are a big contributor to supply, and we are ambitious and want to do more, but our position is fragile. And if you would allow me just to talk through very briefly the impact of the last 14 years in terms of why we are in the position we are in terms of reductions to both capital and revenue funding. In 2010, the government slashed the capital budget for affordable housing by 63%. We also, during that period of time, had no specific funding for social rented homes, the most affordable tenure, typically half the price of a private market rent. We had no funding for regeneration. That is now coming back. But there was a huge change in terms of how housing associations were funded. In 2010, around half of the funding for new supply, for new development, came from grant. As you've just heard from Fiona and Holly, that is drastically reduced now. So the model moved to one where we would borrow, and we would borrow against, and we do borrow against, our future income streams from rent. As part of that, it's really important that we have confidence in what those rents are going to be, and government sets our social rent formula. In 2015, we had a 10-year rent agreement of CPI +1, and that was very quickly overturned to a 4-year rent reduction from 2016. We also had a cap in rents that came through during that very high period of very high inflation. And what that means is our rents, our income from rents, is 15% lower in real terms than it would have been in 2015. It's taken a huge amount of capacity out of the system. We also, because we are, our model works both in terms of, or has been in terms of borrowing, and our regulation is very, very important in terms of lender confidence. We have a no loss from default record, but we are now exposed to higher inflation and interest rates. And then against this backdrop, there has been a necessary shift towards our existing stock to make our homes safe, green, and fit for the future. So when we look at overall housing association spend on repairs and maintenance, it hit a record high last year. It was 8.8 billion. That's a 13% increase. And over the next 5 years, our members expect to spend around 50 billion on repairs, maintenance, and investment. This is really important that we have this investment in our existing homes. But without capital grant for that investment in our existing homes, it has to be paid for from rent. And I think much of this investment, particularly on building safety and on decarbonisation, it couldn't have been planned for at the time that the homes were built. And so it's not really appropriate to load all of that on rent. It just can't cover it. And so we think there's a really strong case. We're very committed to new supply, but there's a really strong case for thinking more comprehensively around longer-term investment in our existing homes through a social housing investment fund. And part of the way we would like to see that come forward is fair and equal access to building safety funding. And again, the funding that's available through the Building Safety Fund and the Cladding Safety Scheme at the moment, 90% of that has gone to private building owners. The 10% that has gone to social landlords is only where it's above 18 metres and has ACM on the building, or where there are leaseholders in the building. So we don't think that is a fair situation that social tenants' rents are being, having to pay for a failure of construction and a failure of the building safety regime. So equal access to building safety funding would massively help. We also have the Warm Homes Fund, and as part of that, there was an announcement of the Warm Homes Social Housing Fund just before Christmas, 1.29 billion, hugely welcome. But again, if we could think about the Warm Homes funding alongside equal access to decent the building safety funding, as well as some new funding for decency, that would release a huge amount of capacity in order for us to be able to build, not just at current levels, but to increase our build-out rates.
I think that's good and a good overview, but I think about some of the correspondence we all receive as members of Parliament from constituents with regards to repairs and maintenance. So you're saying a big bulk of your members' funding is going towards that. I think it would paint a different picture when we speak to constituents who have been waiting for some of those long-term repairs and maintenance. You hear examples of where essentially people have waited for call-outs, that doesn't happen, And they sometimes question why housing associations are saying they need more money when they feel that some of them don't spend their money adequately. Would you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I think there are absolutely examples where residents are not getting things done in a way that we'd want them to have it done in terms of timeliness of repairs, the ability to fix the problem first time. And that's a complex picture. There is an issue here around access to trades. There's an issue here around the prioritisation of resource. There's also a really significant issue here, though, of overcrowding, of the age of our housing stock, and the lack of investment in regeneration. Now, that isn't to excuse where things have gone wrong, and absolutely we're working very, very hard on quality and investment. As I said, there is a huge increase going into repairs and maintenance right now, 8.8 billion last year, and a huge amount of work on that. Over the last couple of years, the National Housing Federation, together with the Chartered Institute of Housing, commissioned an independent review called the Better Social Housing Review, and we've been working on that with members right across the country around making sure we have really good data on our homes, not just on the quality of our homes and stock condition, but also on who lives there, the pressures that they're facing, on improving repairs and maintenance where it's needed. But the bigger issue here is around having enough money to properly ensure that our homes are fit for purpose. There are huge pressures on organisations in terms of the stretch, and particularly in situations where there are big building safety costs, there's just not enough money in the system.
Thank you. Martyn, what would you say is the biggest current financial pressure facing Nottingham community housing?
For North Devon homes, certainly the inflationary impact of maintenance costs. So for us, 40% of our turnover is on maintenance, and if you include that with capital expenditure, it rises to 50% of turnover. So a huge amount of money has been invested into our stock. The price volatility on sort of inflationary impact on those costs can be quite impactful. So trying to manage that and maintain those costs within our sort of projected repairs programs is quite challenging. We do benefit from things like the Warm Homes programme and other capital grants, so there are opportunities for us to offset some of those costs, but certainly cost pressures are a real sort of issue for us at the moment in the housing sector, with a lack of skills and sort of materials and costs coming through the supply chain.
Is there a dedicated programme that you have in terms of new homes and being built, or again are you seeing the same pressures maintaining existing stock?
Yeah, so we're maintaining a modest programme at the moment, which is about 15% of our turnover, so not a huge amount of money. And us, like a lot of other housing associations, have really turned down our development spending at the moment, whilst we address the maintenance issues and the stock issues that we just talked about. You have to say that a lot of the stock that we are managing is post-war stuff that was built in 50s and 60s, so it's becoming 50, 60 years old now. So trying to ensure that that meets decent homes and warm and efficient energy efficiency targets requires significant investment. And this is quite impactful on residents as well, so trying to get the balance right in terms of investment in homes and not disturbing customers' lives and trying to work around them is also a real challenge for us at the moment as we try and set about that. But we try and maintain around 15% of turnover at the moment. We'd like to do more, but it is very much reliant on the housing market. The housing market is very stagnant at the moment, so that means that we're not able to cross-subsidise as much to fund new development. So, we're in that sort of downward cyclical sort of part of the economy at the moment. Hopefully that will change.
Just one quick follow-up question, if I may, to the housing associations. Actually, how much have you all got in reserves in your respected, and please don't tell me you don't know, you come here to talk about finances today, you're saying you need more money, so how much have you all got in reserves?
Fiona.
I'll start with L&Q. We finished last year with a surplus of 120 million. It's not cash, so it's not available to spend. Because I have to borrow and have a loan book of about 5 billion, I'm required to keep a certain amount of money available to pay the interest bill. And that's what that money is. We don't tend to carry reserves. What we tend to do is we do a series of contingency planning and stress testing to understand what are the likely risks that are going to hit us and make sure that we have sufficient money to be able to cover those. But it isn't that we sit on a surplus.
I would agree with that exactly. So our turnover at NCHA is just over 100 million. I think last year our surplus was about 9 million. So, and that is reinvested back into the development programme, largely into the development programme. And we are required, obviously, we're a V1 organisation with the Regulator of Social Housing, and obviously we're required to meet loan covenants and other golden rules that our board set for us to make sure that we have a good position to borrow money from in the future. So we, again, we're not sitting on reserves, it's all reinvested. Certainly for NCHA housing stations, we're really committed to trying to deliver new homes. We want to end the housing crisis, that's our purpose.
Martyn.
And we're a V2 organisation, so it means we're slightly more highly geared than my colleagues here. So we have much higher borrowing than some other registered social housing. So we have very little reserve in terms of us. So it's only about 6 million for us. So it's quite low levels.
Lee.
I just wanted to come back on Fiona. So if you had the surplus, did you say 123 million? Did you 121?
120 last year.
120, and then after you've paid your loan charges back, what's your surplus after that? Because you said that's there to pay, but the surplus is after you've paid all your costs.
So what we have to maintain a level of surplus which covers the interest bill, and we were required to pay 150% of our interest bill on a 5 billion loan book.
Thank you. Joe.
A follow-up on building safety. So in the budget, the Chancellor said there would be new investment to speed up remediation of social housing, and then in the remediation action plan they said there would be a strategy for social housing published in the spring. So maybe just to Kate first, to understand specifically what you're looking for in that strategy that would help ease that financial pressure, because obviously we all want remediation to speed up. 7.5 years post Grenfell, the pace of remediation has been far too slow. So what are you looking for specifically?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I think just to reiterate that the safety of residents is the absolute top priority and must be. Just to clarify, so the previous government took the decision that meant that social landlords could not access the Building Safety Fund and the cladding safety scheme in the same way as private building owners. And private building owners have received 90% of the government funding available for remedial works to buildings of 11 metres plus. So there's almost no public funding available for works to flats where social tenants live. Our position on this is that it is immoral and unfair, and diverting social tenants' rents away from investment in repairs, maintenance and new supply is wrong. Now, what we would like to see is, and we are working very constructively with the new government on the acceleration plan, but what we would like to see come forward is equal access to the Building Safety Fund and the cladding safety scheme, so that we are on a level playing field with private building owners. The National Audit Office estimates that the cost of remediating cladding to social landlords is around 3.8 billion. We'd estimate that to remediate all defects, we're looking at a cost of around 6 billion. But this issue goes to the heart of the government being able to deliver its 1.5 million homes target. And I think also, many of those organisations who are severely impacted by the building safety crisis are in areas of acute housing need, particularly London and the South East. So what we would really like, our top priority is fair and equal access to the Building Safety Fund.
And if I could just ask your colleagues, what would that mean in terms of releasing capital for new homes?
If I start, so for L&Q, it will be just short of £500 million, so about 460 million. But could I just add, in addition to the equity point about allowing us to have Building Safety Fund for social housing, there's other help that the government can give, and we're talking to the new Fire Minister about this. I'll give you an example. There's a South London borough where in 2019 we had to empty a block. We had to move everybody out of a block of 70 flats. That was 2019. There was no mitigation we could put in place, no waking watch, nothing we could do to make that block safe. The only choice was to take people's homes away from them and move them, and all the disruption that meant. That was 2019. We started negotiating with the original builder of the building. And we have tried and tried and tried and failed, and we have so far spent roughly £1 million on legal fees. It has now got to the stage that arbitration is failing. So the court date I'm being offered is 2026. So that is an empty building in South London where the housing need is exceptional, but standing empty because I'm required to go through the waterfall method of going after the original builder. One of the players in this mix is the insurance industry. Yeah. So even where the developer would like to settle with us, his insurers are preventing him from doing that. So I think there's a real role for the government to play in intervening and helping us make that happen faster. Because I can tell you the leader of that particular London borough is desperate for those homes. And the second thing that the government could do in addition to the Building Safety Fund is around skills. So that particular case, each of the subcontractors involved and the main contractor have to have their own fire engineer. So there are at least 8 fire engineers. Then I have to have a fire engineer, that's 9. Then you have to have an independent, which is 10 fire engineers. We simply don't have them. So I think there is a lot of work that the government can do in mission-based government approach of working across government department boundaries to really put some oomph into upping the skills that we have in the country. So it's not just money. To the point.
And then just quickly, another new policy which you'll be required to implement is Web's Law. 14 days for an investigation, 7 days if there's a significant concern. Have you made an assessment of the cost of implementing that? Does anyone want to take that question?
If I could just briefly come in on Fiona, if you could come in on the cost aspect of it, that would be great for your organisation. Just on Web's Law to say that it's really important that we all support the principle of quickly addressing issues of damp and mould in people's homes and that they're dealt with swiftly and effectively. And I think we really want to ensure that the proposals that come forward are focused, are clear and are deliverable for housing associations so that we get the best outcomes for residents. We would really welcome the opportunity to talk further with the committee specifically on this around what was proposed in the consultation of March last year, which had a far broader scope than that, than the original proposals. And I think the expanded scope, particularly including things that are not within the gift of the social landlords, for example, overcrowding, would mean that it would be incredibly difficult to deliver as consulted on. So we just want to ensure what's proposed that actually comes forward, delivers really for social landlords, is really focused on damp and mould, particularly in the initial phase of it being rolled out, and we'd be really happy to provide more information on that. And just to reiterate, we absolutely support the principle, but it needs to be workable. In terms of costs, I don't know, Fiona, if you have sort of estimates.
So we're trying to cost it up at the moment. We've calculated that about 64% of our day-to-day repairs would be covered by Web's Law. So we are, with everything included in Web's Law, we are absolutely we have to do it anyway. We have to fix these repairs. The question for us is around the timescales and how quickly we can do it. And to do something faster will add a premium. So we calculate on a 400 million day-to-day repair budget, it will cost us maybe 20 million extra. The problem, again, is I'll repeat this a lot, I think, today. It's not just about money, though. So in London, if I just give you an example of roofing, the London Homes Coalition that I chair, we're looking at our supply chain and the work that we need to do. We only have 85% of the roofers that London and the South East need. So every time it rains, my inbox is literally full of residents who've got water pouring through the roofs, and I simply can't get the people to help. Now, we are solving our own problem in a sense that we will increase the number of apprenticeships we take this year, and we're creating 70 new apprenticeships at L&Q alone. But we again need help from government to the FE sector needs support and needs money and energy. The Home Office have already loosened the rules on roofers coming into the country, for example. That's really helpful. So all of this needs to come together, and it's not just about money anymore.
Just follow up on that, Fiona. You're saying that 64% of the funding is on that, yeah. And you're saying that you already have to do this. Would you not say that if housing associations already had to do this, we wouldn't see some of the influx that we see in our inboxes, because essentially it's not being done, and that's why we had to bring this legislation?
Yeah, the issue is one of timescales, and I think there are absolutely cases where we fail. I know at L&Q we have failed and we have let people down. But the case is made more difficult in terms of timescales. I'll give you another example. I was working with another South London MP last week on a case where we've had a roof leak, which is causing damp. We had to sack 3 roofing companies and have got a final roofing company who did the repair. It has taken us a year to get through that because the people are simply not there to do it. Now, we've offered whatever support and compensation and alternative accommodation for that resident, but that's not ideal. So we really need help with the people. And it's not just about the money. And it's our priorities have shifted from development to repairs and maintenance and investing in the existing stock. But we need support in getting the right people to be able to do that.
Martyn.
Chair, can I just add to that is around, I think, certainly we all support the principles wholeheartedly. The costings, we need a bit more work, and talk to government around the principles and all the rest of it to actually get that right. I think there is one thing, though, linked to the regeneration of the building safety question, which is really around the change in demographics for a lot of the housing these days. So we're seeing much more families coming together than we did in previous years. So we're seeing far more incidences of overcrowding and maybe 2 or 3 families living together when previously that wouldn't happen, with the changes in family makeups these days. So without the new supply element or the regeneration or the access to repair some of the existing stock, this is really having a real sort of negative impact on our existing stock, and this is what's causing this huge problem of building safety, damp mould and all the rest of it that's going with that. We are trying as housing associations to stem that issue, but the real issue around that is about supply and regeneration and access.
And I challenge you on that to say that we are seeing more families moving together because they can't afford to buy. They can't afford to live in a private rented sector because we're not building those affordable homes that people could normally move into. So I think where we have a situation where more families are living together and we see that overcrowding, is it a case of looking at the condition of the properties in terms of long-term condition, the build of the properties, or is it generally issues around overcrowding? So I think there are 2 things that we definitely need to look at on that point. Would you not?
Yes, it's just 2 issues, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just mindful of time. Just a final question for me, just around, and all of you have touched on it at one point in terms of rent settlement. Obviously, the government have announced that they're proposing to look at another 5-year rent settlement from March, and I think that consultation's just finished. What impact do you think the changes to rent settlement would mean for all of you in terms of helping to fund and invest in new stock? Holly?
Yes, I mean, we welcome the consultation on the rent settlement at CPI plus 1%. I think that will help support unlocking capacity to build more homes, definitely. I think there is nervousness around around that being a final position. So obviously we've had experiences where that rent settlements have been rowed back on. That's hugely problematic. So I think the sector would really appreciate confidence on a 10-year rent settlement. I mean, we certainly support that from NCHA's perspective, and having that sort of in statute, so we know we can business plan on that basis with confidence and know that it's not going to change. I mean, this year, the September CPI being lower, plus 1%, has taken money out of our business planning for this year. So we will still have to manage those kind of fluctuations where inflation is higher across the whole year than perhaps it was in September, where our rent settlement is pegged to. But anything we can anything the government can do to support confidence in the sector, for that would be welcome. So we really support that.
Would a 10-year versus 5-year be better in terms of some of the work you're planning in North Devon? Absolutely.
So our longer-term business plans are over 30 years. It takes me 8.5 years from the time I look at a site this week to when that site will actually be ready for a customer. So stuff I look at this week won't be ready until 2033 under current and the framework and planning and everything else. We've got to think very differently about that, trying to time the finance and the strategic finance to enable those schemes to come forward 8 years hence is one of our biggest challenges. And if we can get some long-term support, some long-term plans, some long-term strategy, that will enable us to unlock the reserves and the resources that we have to deliver more homes.
Chris and then Lee, very quickly.
I mean, is it, assuming you've got a fixed budget, that's quite an out there question, but is it possible to put a figure on what percentage extra homes you'd be able to get built or take on if you had that 10 years rather than 5 years? Is it possible to kind of come up with an estimate of what kind of difference that would make?
So for me at the moment, our 15% of turnover, so we're quite a small organisation compared to some of these other guys, so but that for us would be a 100% difference in sort of in numbers. If we were doing 100 units, we could do 200 units.
If there was that 10-year settlement rather than a 5-year settlement, you think you'd be able to double the number of homes you take?
It would help us to the longer term.
And I think just on that, grant rates are really important as well. I mean, that is the real. I mean, the rent settlement's really important, but upping grant rates for us in the East Midlands, we think we could significantly increase our programme with Enhance. And if we had grant rates of over, kind of 100,000 to be matched by our borrowing, that would enable us to really unlock. And we have opportunities to develop. There are opportunities for us to up our programme. We could do more.
It's similar to Chris's, but you must have to make an assumption on what you think rents are going to be after that 5-year period. So what's your assumptions at the moment? Are you matching the 5-year offer, or are you taking a reduction in that in case it drops in years 5 to 10?
So we're matching that longer term, but we're also then sort of stress testing against the likelihood of it reducing as well. So we're taking a mixed approach to that. So we're being ready. Strategy will be ready for either option. But I think it's about 10-year settlement, but it's also about rent convergence as well, which is important, about bringing rents up to a much more fair settlement across the country. We have lots of rents that are very out of step across different areas that need to be addressed, and I think that would help enormously.
Fiona, then Kate.
Just a very quick point to repeat what Martyn said, really. And if we had rent convergence as well as a 10-year settlement, for London that would be worth 221 million. And we think we can do it in a way that's affordable for residents as well, which is very important.
Kate, very quickly.
Yeah, just to add, so it's really welcome that the government have consulted on rents at the first possible fiscal moment, and this is about rebuilding the capacity of the social housing sector. The fact it is CPI +1 is very welcome. The fact that the consultation started with 5 years. You've heard from my colleagues that 10 years would be better, and that is about giving the confidence to our lenders, to our boards and to our residents about the future direction of our organisations. In addition to that, convergence, which is something that the previous Labour government did, had a massive impact and would significantly help deliver on our development ambitions. Convergence is a way of getting to a fair, bringing up rents to the rent formula for all residents. It would be done in a graduated, affordable way, working with tenants very transparently. Convergence would have the biggest impact in London, where 23% of rents have never caught up with rent formula. And again, when you kind of match that to where there is huge pressure and overcrowding, and just in terms of linking that back to supply, our modelling shows that convergence would unlock at least an additional 92,000 homes over the next decade compared to current projections, by raising an additional £3.5 billion for housing associations by 2035. So it's very significant, and if the committee would mind it would be great to have that as a response into government following the consultation.
Right, thank you. Moving on to developer contributions, Nachaba.
Yes.
Just mindful, sorry, of our guests as well in terms of shorter, snappy responses. Thank you.
I'll keep this short as well. So just in terms of developer contributions, how well do you think agreements such as Section 106 work for delivering social and affordable housing, and what do you think could be, how could we improve that in order to really enable you to bring it?
Want to start?
So I think firstly, Section 106 incredibly important to new supply. Section 106 planning obligations delivered 48% of all new affordable homes in the last financial year. This figure represents 12% of all supply. So Section 106 really important for our members, but really important for communities and the ability to deliver mixed communities across the country. There are real challenges with the ability for our members to be able to continue to kind of deliver Section 106 at the same levels because of the financial capacity of the sector, so the interest cover and the cost of investment in existing homes, particularly on quality and safety, impacting on that. Having said that, there are some other issues with Section 106s, and I'll just very quickly run through 4 of them, super quick. Firstly is the quality of the deal. Housing associations exist to support and deliver for current residents and future residents. house builders exist to return profit to shareholders. They have different drivers. So the deal needs to be right for us to be able to want to access it. The deal also needs to be balanced. So again, there's an increased risk being placed on housing associations in terms of upfront buying rather than a pay deposit now, pay on, the remainder on completion. Secondly is the quality of the home, and this is particularly around gas boilers. Now, whilst the Future Home Standard is not yet in force, it is the direction of travel. It's really important that housing associations do not take on homes which we're going to have to retrofit and pay for the cost of the retrofit to replace gas boilers with heat pumps or solar PV. Thirdly is around the quality of the build, and there are still reports from our members of poor quality finishing in some cases around construction with Section 106. And last but not least is arrangements with managing agents. So it's really important that if a housing association is going into a Section 106 that we are able to deliver transparently for tenants. Some of the issues you will receive in your postbag around service charges are because of managing arrangement agreements where we as a housing association have no ability to influence those costs. And I should just say on service charges, they should never be about profit. They should always be transparent. They should be about, getting properties to work well for tenants, and that's what we're committed to doing. In terms of improving it, firstly, just say really great that the government have scrapped the infrastructure levy that was going to come forward. In terms of improving Section 106, just 3 quick suggestions. Firstly is around improving the capacity of local authorities, so making sure that there are ring-fenced planning fees and specific support between national government and local government for this particular issue. Secondly is around clearer recommendations on viability guidance and transparency, so there are level baselines so that you're going into a Section 106. The council has, it might be through a supplementary planning guidance of viability, setting out what is the minimum we should expect on affordable housing through a Section 106. And then thirdly is training for councillors on what is Section 106 and what it isn't, what it is, what it isn't, and what should be included with that so that they come to it, ready to get the best deal.
Lewis.
Yep, just quickly. So how many homes do you estimate are being turned down by housing associations perfectly up to normal standards and environmental standards of today because you don't want to retrofit them later? Because I don't know many homes that aren't still built with a gas boiler. So does that mean housing associations go, I don't want them 40 homes because they've got gas boilers, so my waiting list, people can wait on there longer, these homes can sit empty, no thanks, there must be thousands across the country, surely.
So I don't have the detail of what that figure is. I know that we've been doing a lot of work with our members, with Homes England, with the MHCLG, and also with private developers on this. I can go away and see if we can find out that figure for you and return to the committee, but I don't have it to hand.
Okay, thank you. Maya.
Sorry, just one quick follow-up. Have any of your members used the clearing service yet that the government launched in December for 106 properties?
I know that we're engaging constructively with the clearance service. Okay. I don't know the outcomes of that. Yeah, I think it's fairly early stages.
Yeah.
Just moving beyond developer contributions, I'm interested in sort of wider business models that you've looked at potentially to generate funding. So just sort of what kind of innovative measures, if any, have your organisations used to sort of generate those extra funds needed to build new social and affordable housing stock? And can I start with Martyn, because I know that you've got kind of a subsidiary.
Yes, so we've embraced local development. So again, working with joint ventures with for-profit providers. So we've got a subsidiary that enables us to work hand in hand with the local authority and local areas. So what we try and do is concentrate on brownfield areas for redevelopment in certain areas and build capacity with local developers. So generally smaller developers, and we take them with us on the journey to actually deliver a scheme. We agree profit and everything else up front. We take any profit made from that scheme and reinvest that back into more development or back into the business for the benefit of residents. So there is a for-profit model, but it sits within a group structure of an organisation. However, that is very much dependent on where the housing market is and how good the housing market is in particular areas. So for us in North Devon, we have places where we have some very high value areas. And for us in North Devon as well, the average wage to house price is 15 times. It's one of the biggest ratio differences. So what we try and do is use the housing market that we have locally to unlock opportunities and investment to reinvest that back into affordable homes. That's been partially successful, but with the downward housing market, that's enabled. So our gift aid receipts have really run down over the last couple of years. Also, the profits that we're able to bring in back into the business have reduced from when they were about 15 to 20% per unit, and now about 6 to 10%, which is what you're seeing across other developers and where the housing market is because of increased costs that we're seeing.
Is there any other examples from the other organisations of approaches you've taken?
So we run 15 joint ventures, so that we're sharing that with lots of people. The other thing that we're doing in London that is quite innovative is we're building 4 local authorities, which we think is really important. A lot of local authorities have the desire to build council housing, but over the years the development teams have been run down, so we're doing that. The other thing I would say, and I don't know if it's innovative, but it's about the shift in emphasis for housing associations about getting back to basics, which is being a good landlord and building new homes. So in the case of L&Q, we have sold our strategic land company in the Midlands recently, and you'll see in the press we are selling our commercial rented portfolio, our private rented company, so that we can raise capacity, because we really want to solve the problem. And it's 1 in 21 children now in London are sleeping in temporary accommodation. So we're not sitting on our hands expecting government handouts.
I think we've heard some really good examples of innovation here. I think the challenge is housing associations, social landlords were traditionally counter-cyclical, but by doing cross-subsidy and innovating in that space, we've become more pro-cyclical, and that probably has kind of reached its peak, particularly in current market conditions. I just want a point to raise, because I think it can be quite tempting to reach for thinking there's an easy solution, kind of a wall of private investment that's going to come in and solve the housing crisis and fix this. And I think, our view very much is, housing associations have been and are able to raise private debt alongside public finance to fund social housing and house building. We have 130 billion worth of debt facilities in place at the moment, and that is a good example of harnessing public and private investment. I think, just to emphasise to the committee, that we don't think a for-profit provider is the answer to the social housing crisis. Social housing is a public good. It's really important that social housing sits, either with a public landlord or a not-for-profit landlord for the benefit of current and future tenants, rather than a driver to increase returns to a shareholder. And I think it's really important, because there's quite a lot of talk at the moment around privatisation, that we learn the lessons of previous privatisation, much of which has led to lower investment and worse services in the long run. For example, we could look at the privatisation of military housing, which has just been reversed, or we could look at the US and Spain, or other examples out of sector like the water companies, who have been able to outmanoeuvre their regulator and generate significant sums for shareholders, but by doing little to generate additional investment into services. So there are some talk right now. There's some talk right now around kind of wholesale privatisation of housing association homes, and I think we would just strongly oppose that. Those homes have substantial investment needs in things like safety, quality, energy efficiency, and we just don't see how you'd be able to extract the profit there from what is the social rent. So we are very much committed to innovating and delivering on the housing crisis, but we do not think privatisation is part of the solution to this.
Lewis, really quickly.
So how much does it cost you to build? So like for the private sector costs X to build exactly the same home as you, and you cost Y. How much more? I'm assuming it costs you guys more to build exactly the same as the private sector. How much more and why?
I'm not sure that it does cost
us more.
No,
I was going to say, we have a construction company within L&Q, and it doesn't cost us more, and we do a lot of benchmarking to make sure that we keep those costs. What is different is we don't have a profit margin that we need to achieve. We have what we describe as a hurdle rate, where we try and make an internal profit, but all of that money is reinvested into the housing association. So we generally build at the same price. The difference could be, I'll build maybe 3,000 homes a year, where Barrett's will build 10,000. So in terms of the supply chain, they're able to drive a little bit more out of that.
Why are you sitting here saying we need more grants? Where does that
fit? What we're saying is that generally the sector is very well funded, but our priorities at the moment are to invest in the existing homes. Now, in the past, we would be able to invest in existing homes and use spare money to go into new build. What we're saying, because of the cost of capital, the inflationary impacts over the last couple of years, we have less money to be able to cross-subsidise new building. So what we're saying is, if the government wants us to be part of the 1.5 million new homes, and we desperately do want to be part of that, something else is going to have to come in to enable us to cross-subsidy. And two of the things we're asking for is around the rents, the rent settlement and the rent convergence, and then around access to things like the Building Safety Fund for social rented homes, so that we can take that money that we are spending in that area and put it into new build.
Yeah. Martyn, quickly.
Hopefully some numbers that may help. It costs us exactly the same. We work with private developers in our local housing market. It's about 200,000 for a standard unit. We are only taking £120 a week rent, social rent for that unit. Okay, so if you aggregate that up over the life of the property, it's £100,000 subsidy in terms of rent and income and netted off. That means that you need £100,000 worth of grant basically to make that stack up on a social rent model in the land, where we're at, and that's exclusive of any land costs that then get added on top of that. So where we can build on our own land, or we can work with local authorities or other partners, we can unlock stuff, but it's a £200,000 bill. We'll only ever get £100,000 back because of the rent. So what we're saying about grant is that our existing customers shouldn't be subsidising new homes. It needs to come from government support, and that's the difference. The difference between the costs in the last 5 years have gone from about 150,000 a unit to 200 because of the price supply chain, inflation, and everything else.
Rent. Thank you.
Yeah, just to close out, I guess, the for-profit point, just interested if there's anything that any of you think, you want to see more from the regulator to ensure that where there is that for-profit involvement, that we're kind of keeping an eye on that.
I don't think so. I think for us it's just balancing the risk. The regulator does a good job. So it's a volatile housing market. You're on the downward cyclical things at the minute. The regulator is very sort of in our face really to make sure that we don't put any social housing assets at risk. So the deals that we put together reflect that, but we're always trying to work on a long-term strategy. So 8.5 years, as I said, we're trying to look at deals 8 years hence, and that's the issue really. That's usually the problem that we have. But the regulator gives us enough latitude, but not too much in a risky market, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lee.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to ask a couple of questions around government strategy for social and affordable housing. And if I can ask a closed question to you, Kate, first of all, and then a more generic one. So Kate, in your view, how aligned is the Affordable Homes Programme with the needs of the social housing sector in particular? And then how could grant funding be improved? Obviously, recognising what you've said already, Fiona.
So I think our current Affordable Homes Programme is running into its final year. We had a welcome top-up to that programme announced in the budget of 500 million, but what we really need to see now is a new programme coming forward that is ambitious and kind of meets the scale of the challenge. Now, in order to rebuild the capacity of housing associations, this isn't one thing, it's a number of different levers, and we've talked about many of them today. So it's having a long-term rent settlement at CPI +1 with convergence for 10 years. It's having a new affordable homes programme. It's having that investment in our existing homes covering safety, decency and sustainability, and also it's around a longer-term revenue settlement for housing-related support for the supported housing. In terms of a new affordable homes programme, though, this is something that's being developed right now. We're expecting it to come forward with the spending review. We've been really encouraged to hear the Deputy Prime Minister commit to a long-term housing strategy, and I think what we would like to see is a bold, ambitious housing strategy that really is long-term. So actually enables us not just to plan for the next couple of years, but think about 10, 20, 30 years. If we want to have system change, if we want to solve the housing crisis, it is going to take time. So truly long term. We would like a housing strategy that is focused both on new supply, but also our existing homes and communities. So actually thinking about it in the round and the interactions between those investments in quality and place, as well as new supply. And then thirdly, we'd like a strategy to be outcomes-based, and this does link to a new affordable homes programme. Starting with the problem we are trying to solve. We have 160,000 children living in temporary accommodation. It's an absolute scandal. It would be great, for example, if an outcome of a housing strategy is no child is homeless in 10 years, And actually then when you look at the programme, you have a new affordable homes programme that is geared towards placemaking, it's geared towards economic growth, addressing affordability, addressing homelessness. And we'd like to have a very strong focus on social rent in there as part of that, but also on regeneration, placemaking and the mix, so including things like shared ownership as well.
Okay, so you've almost answered my second question, which I haven't asked yet. But that was if you can make one recommendation to government, and I think you've made multiple there. Just bringing us back to the affordable homes programme in particular. So it's about new builds rather than existing stock. So within the affordable homes programme itself, what specific changes would you like to see the government make, rather than being bold and forward thinking and all inclusive?
Okay, so to start increasing the supply of social and affordable housing, I'm going to go for two. We would like a bigger affordable homes programme to meet the scale of need, but also higher grant rates.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming before the committee this morning. I think a range of distant questions and obviously some of those cost pressures that all of you are facing, but essentially it's how we continue with that ambition to help the government in terms of their strategy to build 1.5 million new homes. Thank you very much. We're going to have a swap over of the panel now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Order. Welcome to our second panel on our committee report inquiry on housing associations. Can I just ask our guests to introduce themselves, please, for the committee?
Neil Jefferson, I'm Chief Executive of the Home Builders Federation.
Fiona McGregor, I'm Chief Executive of the Regulator of Social Housing.
I'm Chris Buckle, I'm a Director in Savills Residential Research Team.
Fantastic. Thank you for appearing before the committee this morning. We have a range of different questions on looking at housing associations and some of the impact it has on the regulators. I'll start with Mayor.
Hi, so my initial question sort of aimed at Fiona mainly. So our predecessor committee found that there were a number of challenges to the economic regulation of the sector, including an increasing reliance on borrowing and large-scale mergers. So do you find that these are still challenges, and what are you doing to address them, if so?
So as we've heard in the previous session, and you'll also see in many of our publications, some of the numbers have already been quoted. The sector is increasingly reliant on borrowing at the moment for the reasons that have been well rehearsed previously, because they are investing record amounts of money currently in existing homes, and they're having to borrow to support that or use previous year's surpluses. So yes, the impact of that means that there's less capacity to borrow to build new homes, and we're seeing some changes in the numbers in the forecast. I can go through them later if that's helpful. So capacity has changed, and also borrowing costs, because interest rates have gone up, borrowing costs have gone up as well. And although a lot of the sector's debt is fixed, we saw last year, I think it was a 12% increase in the cost of borrowing year on year. So it is increasing for the reasons that have just been set out. In terms of mergers, merger activity, I think, happens for a number of reasons. We get providers, and there's been probably a bit of a change over the years about the size of providers who are looking to merge and the reasons that they're looking to merge. Providers will consider merging either to build their resilience in the current circumstances, or actually to build capacity and try and kind of match capacity to be able to increase their contribution to the new supply. And then from time to time, a merger will occur, and we've seen a couple happen recently, where a provider's in some financial difficulties, is facing some real pressures. They can't manage their way out of those on their own. They have to look for a merger partner, a stronger partner to support that. And we've seen a couple of those happen recently, Octavia, for example, with Abri. So from time to time a merger will be for those reasons as well.
Thank you. And can you tell me what elements of the financial viability assessments that housing associations struggle with the most?
In terms of meeting our requirements, is that
yes?
Yes. So I think there's a real balance for providers, for housing associations, in how they use their money. And again, we've heard some of that in the last session. They're constantly trying to trade off choices between their two essential agendas, I think, which is investing in their existing homes to make sure that they're of good quality, that really importantly that they're safe and that they're meeting current requirements, and they're doing what they can actually to minimise the call on day-to-day repairs and maintenance that affects tenants that we've heard about. That's a really fundamental requirement, I think, on providers. And for reasons of changes in standards, the cost of that has been going up recently, again, as we've just heard. They're constantly trying to trade that off against their other priority, which I think certainly most of the larger associations really subscribe to, is also wanting to kind of increase the supply of new homes because of the demands that there are out in the country, the use of temporary accommodation, all of the pressures that tenants face. So that's the kind of trade-off that they're constantly trying to make and keeping that in balance. From our perspective, we will judge how they've been making that trade-off in our viability judgments, and we will grade providers V1 to V4. We've now got around 2/3 of providers at V2. It used to be about 1/3. It's now about 2/3. V2 we consider to be that we're perfectly comfortable with V2, provided that it's well managed, that the financial governance of the organisation means that the board, the executive understand the risks that they're taking on and that they can manage them. And what V2 says is that they are trying to use their capacity to meet those two sets of priorities and kind of maximise their contribution on both, and we're content with V2. V3 and V4 is a different question, different matter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think Tad. Okay, moving on. So,
just building on that, really, what support do you provide for these housing associations when they are struggling with their finances? Well, we may be talking about that V3, V4 categories, and what are the consequences if a provider is receiving that failing viability grade?
Sure. So I think the first thing to say is we do a huge amount of monitoring work across the whole of the sector in terms of housing association viability. So the grades that we're in the middle of publishing at the moment are as a consequence of what we call an annual stability check. So once a year we will check the finances, revised, updated business plans, and either confirm or change that viability grading. We also get quarterly returns where we're looking really, really closely at liquidity and making sure that providers have sufficient liquidity in the short to medium term to make sure that they can meet their obligations and liabilities. What that does, and what we're always aiming to do, is get that forward sight of where problems might be starting to arise, so that we can work with providers from an early stage. And what you're looking for is providers who can take action, that they can control themselves, to sort their problems out. And for the most part, that is what happens. That's the vast majority. But if you get a provider that's veering into sort of V2, V3 territory, that monitoring from us, that very active monitoring, will be increased significantly. Monthly, weekly cash flows, monitoring the effectiveness of the actions that they're taking. If a provider gets into V3 territory, occasionally they can find a way to trade out on their own and resolve that. But for very often what that means is they will have to find a stronger, more financially viable partner to support them and assist, and we will be right in there alongside them while that gets worked through. As was said in the previous session, that's been successful to date. We've got a no loss on default record where borrowing is secured against social housing homes, social housing assets. So it's a successful model of trying to spot problems very early and give us time with the provider to work those through, and in some cases that might mean a rescue.
And you've obviously alluded to the fact that you are seeing a change in the number of housing associations that are receiving poorer viability grades over recent years. So in which areas are they most struggling, like within the assessment?
So again, we've heard in the previous session, there's been a number of pressures which have kind of layered on, if you like, in terms of provider finances, which has led them to have to make some difficult choices and trade-offs around, prioritising existing stock, currently, in some cases, over new supply. And the drivers of that, the things that have been driving that is in some cases, building safety works, those costs have been quite high and continue to be for the kind of foreseeable future. Anticipating and making sure they're meeting any future decent home standards, working towards net zero and getting to EPCC. A range of changes in standards which mean that, as well as some of the well-publicised examples, which have then meant, rightly, I think, an increased focus on quality of homes generally around damp and mould, longer-term planned maintenance, but others where, again, either rightly and over longer-term standards have changed, whether it's fire safety standards, building safety standards, or getting to net zero. All of those things are essentially non-negotiable costs for providers, and that has put real pressure on their finances, because what they do, unlike new build, is they take investment but they don't generate any additional rental income, and that's why you're either servicing it with borrowing but you've not got any extra rental income coming in to support that borrowing, or using any reserves that you've got.
And you sort of say it's non-negotiable, but it would appear evident from some of the worst examples that unfortunately have reached the press around some of the housing standards under some housing associations may be worse than under others. To what extent within the regulator is kind of the financial viability held as the most important element to oversee versus the importance of making sure that we tackle all of these damp issues and we do make sure that all providers are bringing those homes up to standard at a pace as quickly as possible? And what penalties do you have available for tackling the latter part of that, even if the financial viability tests are coming in, at V1?
Yeah.
For example.
So just to be very clear, if a provider was at V1 but at the same time not investing in its stock and keeping it to a good standard, we would be right in there, and that would be reflected in their governance grading and in the new consumer gradings, which I'll come back to in a second. I think we focus obviously on viability of a provider, because if they're not financially viable, they can't do any of the other things. So it's a means to an end. It's really important from that perspective. However, their viability is there to serve tenants in terms of quality of services, but quality of homes and safety of those homes. So what has changed, I'm sure you'll be aware, since 1st of April last year, we have introduced new consumer standards following the Social Housing Regulation Act. New consumer standards where we're much more explicit about things like understanding your stock, knowing that you've been in and done a stock condition survey of all of your homes, and that's reflected in your business plans, and you're bringing all of your homes up to scratch. And the really fundamental thing that has changed since 1st of April last year is we no longer regulate consumer on a responsive, reactive basis. It's proactive, and we can go in and test that, and we're doing so. And I think seeing some good results of providers in the round starting to really focus on the quality of their stock and bringing it up. And that's where we will find, either through complaints or through our programme of inspections, we will call it out when we see it and reflect that in our consumer judgments. And they are pretty effective, I think, in galvanising providers who are not taking action. It's rare, but galvanising them into taking action.
Thank you. Well,
thank you, Chair. So the biggest issue I get in my post-bag as the MP for Woking is, unsurprisingly, housing and the lack of housing. So are there specific difficulties in building more affordable and social housing compared to other types of tenure? And if so, what are they?
Chris?
Building affordable housing requires a subsidy. So that's the first point, I suppose, and that either comes through land value capture via a Section 106 agreement, or it comes through the government's affordable homes programme through grant. So both of those things are limited. The grant programme is limited in terms of its extent, and the amount of land value capture that's available is also limited, and then it's further limited by the amount of activity the private house building sector is able to do. It's reliant on house builders developing volumes of new homes, because Section 106 will be a proportion of the private sector, and then there are I guess there are further limits in terms of how big the private sector can be, given all the other housing market dynamics across the whole market.
I think for private developers, there's a single issue here, which is as a result of all of the issues which have been very well framed in the previous session and in part already in this session. We can see that housing associations, RPs, their appetite for land-led development is very much diminished because of all the challenges that they're facing. But actually, one of the bigger issues for us in the house building industry has been the reliance on Section 106 developer contributions. If you look back between the period of 2001 to 2017, the average, the percentage of housing supply coming from 106s was 15%. As Kate mentioned in this session a moment ago, it's currently running at 48%, and it's been running at 48% since 2017. So there's a huge, perhaps, over-reliance on the homes that are being delivered under Section 106 agreements around the country. And the specific issue right now is actually that as a result of all the issues that are being discussed today, there's a lack of appetite from RPs, whether they're housing associations or for profits, to actually take on those homes that are being delivered across the country. This has been an issue which has been going on for quite some time, but it's really come to the fore in the last year or so. And we've taken an interest in surveying our members to understand how big that issue is, and it's huge. There are currently about 17,000 homes which could be delivered, which have got planning permission, but there's actually not an RP on hand to take those homes on. Now, I tend to steer clear of the commercialities because there's a bidding process that goes on. There has been an adjustment in terms of prices, but actually where this comes most to the fore is with SMEs, because SMEs who perhaps don't have employees who spend their time liaising and working with housing associations locally will not know who's in the market, and typically they're looking to hand over quite a small number of homes on small sites, which may not be attractive at any one time. So this has really come to a head now. So we're looking to increase housing supply. We have a model which requires affordable homes to be delivered under Section 106 agreements. So that's going to get bigger. But actually, as a result of currently the financial issues that housing associations are facing, plus their competing priorities, particularly around existing stock, which is understandable, then they're struggling with their own development programmes, but more so, they're not taking on the homes that are being delivered. And this is causing issues, because if we're looking to grow the industry and grow capacity, we've actually created a block at the moment, because there are sites which could be built out for all of the reasons, but there isn't a housing association ready to take them on. So I think there's actually a number of timeframes to look at this, and the history is quite important to understand why we got here. But there's a current issue which this needs to be resolved. It needs a pragmatic solution in order to get those homes delivered. It's great to be here actually at a time when the government's looking at a long-term housing strategy. Completely agree with previous comments regarding the importance of that, and we absolutely support the asks of housing associations collectively and individually with regards to long-term rental agreements, convergence, increased grant and increased programme as well. because we need the housing associations to be back into the development sector, but we also need them to be more willing to be taking on these homes that are being delivered through 106 agreements.
Briefly, I think this is to Neil and Chris really, sorry Fiona. What should be done to resolve the issue of unspent developer contributions by local authorities? And then can you briefly touch on what impact the developer contributions have on you as builders and the building industry, but particularly for social and affordable housing? I know there are some exemptions, and you have talked about you're now as a market holding up the affordable housing industry, the new amount of affordable housing. Bar that, what impact is developer contributions having to the wider sector?
Yeah, sorry, what was the first question was, sorry?
What should be done to get local authorities to spend unspent Section 106 or SIL?
I would, Kate Henderson kind of covered this in an answer to in the previous session. I would completely agree. The issue for us is a lack of capacity within local authorities, and it's been welcome to hear that there will be a focus on bringing in more planning officers. We need more enablers, but essentially we need more resource within planning authorities. So we did freedom of information requests around local authorities and discovered that there's £8 billion worth of unspent developer contributions sat within local authorities, 800 million for affordable homes. And I think that really what that tells us is there's a lack of resource going into making sure that that's being actively spent. So that would be the single biggest solution for me.
Yeah. And I think I entirely agree with Neil in that lots of this money is kept is within small local authorities without the resources to spend it. So finding some mechanism of potentially pooling that resource to use on a larger geography may be useful. So particularly in London, could the GLA be using that resource to effectively grant fund affordable housing or acquire Section 106 under some structure to get over the current issue where housing associations aren't able to finance it. In terms of developer contribution, what's the impact that it's having on affordable housing supply? I mean, as has been said, developer contributions have a huge contribution to make to affordable housing supply, and I think given where we've got to, it's important that that contribution is maintained. The challenge that you have, and as we've heard from other people, is that the market moves faster than planning policy, and it moves faster than the rules within grant funding. So the hard and fast planning policies that planning applications are judged against and the hard and fast rules within affordable homes programs have problems when these things don't match up. And so at the moment you have situations where developments are unviable because of the affordable housing requirements placed upon them. The consequence of that is that those developments don't get built. Or you enter into protracted negotiations to try and reduce the affordable housing requirement. So it's just introducing additional blockers in terms of the amount of supply coming forward on sites.
Neil, very quickly.
Yeah, and sorry, just the second part of the question. Our single ask with regards to resolving in the short term these issues with the blockages which are creating is the single biggest problem that the industry has at the moment, actually. It's the most common issue that gets raised with us as the largest federation for house builders. Our members build 80% of homes across the country. What we really would like to see is the use of cascade mechanisms and a written ministerial statement instructing local authorities to consider those in these cases where 106, the lack of an RP being available is holding schemes up, would be massively helpful. Actually, because going back through the planning process, if there's not a housing association nearby wanting to take these on, takes a long time and incurs delays and is risky. Whereas actually considering other tenures which may be available for that scheme would get the scheme away. That might be a short-term measure, but as I say, I think there's a longer-term issue about growing the industry, thinking about more homes being built and more affordable homes, but we have this short-term issue which is creating huge problems.
Chris.
I want to come in on this specific point, because I think it's probably one of the most important points, particularly for the 1.5 million target at the moment. I mean, firstly, on it's my pet question, on the capacity point of local planning, do you think 300 extra planning officers are enough, or do you think the council should be doing a lot more than that?
No, we need a lot more than that. I think
we're leading the witness.
There are many other issues that play into this, and I always say, actually, for us, when we speak to developers, planning is number one biggest issue, and number two, and number two, one of those is around resource. But actually, over time, when we think about all of the good things that we do now within development, whether it's biodiversity net gain, the Future Home Standard, which is coming in the meantime, higher standards for sustainability, what we're talking about here today, or I'm talking about Section 106 agreements, all of that work and many other things that we could think of is actually being managed by the same people in the same departments as they used to be. And that work needs to be streamlined. And I think there are things could be simplified or perhaps considered in a broader sense, rather than having a bit like in the previous session when we talked about requiring 10, I think Fiona gave the example of requiring 10 fire engineers. Actually, on individual small sites, I'm sure that there's better ways of getting consultants' reports for particular issues.
Just before I come on to ways that the government can be more helpful, there was many things that Kate mentioned in the previous panel about how registered providers aren't taking on at the moment because they just don't think that the quality of what's being offered is good enough. So do you also think that there is a job on housing house builders in order to ensure that they're not producing these S106 contributions which no provider would ever want to take on?
Yeah, I think it was interesting the order that they were presented, because I think that the word quality means different things to different people. And Kate did explain that actually she talked about the quality of the deal, which I would regard as the commerciality, which actually comes and goes. As Chris says, the market's always moving. Sometimes there are adjustments. She secondly turned to the quality in terms of environmental requirements, and actually this issue that we currently face is that the vast proportion of homes that are being built are still on gas. Increasingly we are seeing more and more off gas and with heat pumps, but there are many which are caught in this situation that I described that will be on gas, and housing associations understandably taking a long-term view about investment. I think construction quality, I really hope, was something which is in the rear-view mirror. Clearly it's something we need to keep an eye on as we ramp up, hopefully, the number of homes that are being built. But in the last few years, the number of homes being built has actually fallen. So actually there's no real strain that's coming from building more homes, which sometimes does impact quality. So I think with regards to construction quality, there were problems, but I think to a large degree those aren't necessarily I don't think it's a reality in terms of what RPs are facing into. Sorry, there is just one more point which I do understand, because of the issues of building safety, why RPs may be interested in being involved in a construction process rather than taking homes off the peg at the end. That's completely understandable. But I think these things can be resolved. I think through the improvements that have been made to building safety, the golden thread and photography along the way, I think there are many ways to demonstrate that a home's been built of good quality and to the standards.
Yeah, and final point for me, and this might be sort of slightly more for Fiona, is a lot of the current registered providers, not for profit, are going to have most of their money focused on fixing up the stock they've got. And it would be great to have more grant money. It would be great to have more certainty on financing, and many of us will keep pushing for that. But at the same time, it is still never going to be enough. So we also need to make sure that we're getting more private capital into the sector. How do we do that? So there's models that we could use. We could use like the LITEC model from the US, for example, which I think is appealing. Do you think they're the kind of options that we should be looking at with for-profit registered providers in order to get more capital into taking on these contributions?
There's definitely a role for for-profit providers in terms of increasing supply and, as you say, bringing capital to the system. I'd come back to my initial point, though, was that you can't have affordable housing without a subsidy, even if you've got private capital coming in alongside it. So you still either need the Section 106 or you need the grant funding to support that delivery.
I think this is the point you raise is reflecting on the steps that have been made by the current government. The moves on planning have been very much welcomed, and work has been done very quickly to improve that situation. With regards to supporting growth and matching the ambition that's been set, it's not just within the affordable housing programme that we need more funding. We also need, as you're suggesting, in the private sector, we need something to be done. It's the first time in 60 years that there isn't a government-backed scheme for first-time buyers. The one, Freedom to Buy, which is actually an extension of an existing mortgage guarantee scheme, doesn't work in the new build sector. And as you're suggesting, I think that with more confidence and with things happening, we probably would attract greater institutional investment as well, which is also needed.
If I may. So I think we've heard a lot about the pressures on housing associations at the moment, and the impact that is having on new build, new supply, new homes. However, it's not a kind of 100% zero game. I think it's worth saying. Last year, we've talked a lot about the record 8.8 billion investment in existing stock. Providers invested 15 billion in new homes, so they're still investing in new homes. The numbers are forecast to start going down, but they're not disappearing entirely. And I think there's some points about differential capacity across the country. Some of these issues
you need them to be going up, though, right? Like,
sorry?
If we want to do 300,000 homes a year, we need it to be going up dramatically.
Yeah, exactly. But to get the numbers up, it's not necessarily a question of the availability of finance. There's lots of finance in the sector. It's still very liquid. Lenders are still very willing to lend into the to the housing associations. So finance isn't the issue, it's the capacity to service the debt, and things that we've talked about, grant will help that. For-profits, however they're funded, whether it's institutional investment, whichever way around, the economics of social housing, the delivery of social housing means that it needs subsidy, so they will still need subsidy. And if it's a for-profit that's going to distribute profits, then you would have to take account of how are they going to generate that extra surplus, to that extra money to distribute profits. Is that through additional subsidy? So I think Chris's point is right. You'd want to be looking at every lever that can be pulled. What are all the options? Where can you increase contributions to supply and new homes overall? But I don't think these are kind of binary, and I don't think they're an either or, and I don't think any single element is the solution. I think it's worth saying.
Chris, obviously Savills commissioned a report and you estimated figures of around 40,000 to 90,000 social housing needed per annum to hit the government's 1.5 million target. Do you feel that where the government haven't set a target that will help the industry in terms of responding to that challenge? The government being very clear not to pin themselves to any targets at the moment.
A target, I suppose, is just sort of is designed to be. I mean, targets are always missed, aren't they? So I think I'd come back to the previous to what Kate Henderson said in the first round. Is what I think will be better is a strategy and a vision for housing that actually adds up to an amount of delivery that looks something like the ambition. I think at the moment, without knowing the scale of the new affordable homes programme, it's very difficult to see how that contributes. So I mean, I think at the moment you're really left with a vast amount of that ambition looking like it's entirely reliant on the private sector and the housing market. And that would require a level of delivery particularly in terms of sales of new homes to individual owner-occupiers, that is completely unprecedented. And we're in a particular, the housing, when those sorts of numbers were approached in the middle of the last decade, the affordability of buying houses was much more straightforward. The market is completely different now. The amount of housing transactions in total is much lower, so we have about 1.1 million home sales a year. If we're talking about selling 200,000 homes a year to individuals, that's 20% of the whole housing market each year. And that's not a level that's ever been reached, and 10% is a more typical number. So I think rather than having a target, having a goal and a vision that actually adds up, and I think that's both across the demand side of things, so who's actually going to finance and manage or occupy these homes, and also on the planning side, where's the land going to come from? Because whilst all the planning changes are very welcome, they're a huge improvement on the last few years, it's going to take a number of years before we're actually planning to deliver 300,000 homes a year. And then beyond local plans planning for 300,000 homes a year, we've actually got to get the planning applications in and deliver the homes. So having a vision for where's this extra land going to come from as well, alongside supporting demand. And I think the demand is crucial. We've focused very much on planning so far in terms of policy. But if we can deliver the land, that's fine. But no one will build the houses unless they can see people who are going to acquire them, either acquire them to rent out to social housing tenants, private tenants, or occupy them themselves.
I suppose on that, Neil, it's a case of, yes, you may have the land, you may not have the people to build the land. You're seeing an increasing case where builders are sort of reluctant to take on that risk. Apart from some of the issues that Chris highlighted in terms of planners, what more do you think that sort of your sector needs to give people that confidence to come forward?
Yeah, I think
build.
The first piece I think Chris has just covered off, and if buyers will buy, builders will build, and we saw that consistently in the period since the financial crisis, where house building output more than doubled. And on the basis of the 300,000 that we've talked about, we've got to 230,000 or so and really faltered. So we need to push on. But demand is most obviously the first issue. We need the conversation today around housing associations, RPs, is important, because actually if we're going to build more homes, some markets that have been left behind for various reasons, perhaps viability or attractiveness, will need to be revisited. And actually the costs of building have significantly increased. We saw the inflationary impact in the last few years, but actually there's just a lot more money that goes into building homes at the standard that's required now. One of the issues which is a particular challenge, I think, is building tall buildings. We have issues with regards to the new building safety regulator and its ability to get through the applications that it's receiving, new codes and requirements. But even when we look at the issues of RP's appetite for 106 homes, there's still an appetite where it exists for low-rise homes, but it's almost gone in terms of building tall buildings. That's something we need to get back into, particularly for London, where where, as you know very well, that there are issues with delivering more homes. The skills side, I think, is it's encouraging to have seen some of the signs so far from government in terms of Skills England. Actually, they're joining up of departments which we'd never seen before, with regards to understanding that unless we do something different, we won't actually deliver the homes that we need. We've got issues regarding the two levies that are paid, one to CITB and one is the apprenticeship levy. The CITB levy, for example, doesn't cover training for heat pumps, which is a vital technology going forwards. But there's some good signals there. But also the industry has to take responsibility for training its own people. It's not the job of government to do that. But there are some really good things going on with regards to £140 million worth of investment in skills hubs around the country, which have got really high retention rates, because one of the sad truths is that we lose a lot of students through building college. They don't make it, they don't convert into the housing industry, whereas those people that are being trained or completing apprenticeships actually on these hubs, which are adjacent to real life building sites, get a great insight to what it'll be like, and the retention rates are very high. So I'm very confident about that, and also that the training programs are shorter. So I think there's a lot of things that we need to do in order to get on and build more homes. But I think we've probably covered most of them already.
Lewis, did you want to?
Yeah, can I just ask, going back to housing associations' assessments, Fiona, and a health check, so to speak, where do you report it to? So you do an assessment on the housing association. Where does that information end up?
So whenever we whenever we come to a conclusion about judgment, and we grade providers on housing associations on three elements. We grade them on governance, we grade them on viability, and we grade them on consumer, which is the new element since 1st of April. Whenever we reach a conclusion about a grade, whether that's through an inspection, which is we've started that programme since April last year, or whether it's as a result of a stability check, which focuses on the finances, as I've said, or whether it's as a result of some responsive work. Whatever conclusion we come to on any or all of those three elements on a grading, we will publish them on our website. So we publish a judgment that will give you a grade 1 to 4 on each of those three aspects, and we will set out the reasons for reaching our judgment. So they're publicly available.
There's no obligation for you to send that to local authorities or tenants?
Well, anyone can, and it's very well used, anyone can sign up, and every time we publish anything, you will get an alert. So anyone can sign up and get the alerts whenever we publish a new judgment. So they're widely available.
Would you respect, you don't go out of your way and send it to anyone that's the local authority, that's a key stakeholder, or tenants? You just expect people to, 1, know about it, 2, sign up on the website, You see that as your job done. We've put it on the website. We've told enough people.
So we engage very extensively with local authorities, in part because we regulate those who are stockholding on consumer now. So we have a regular contact with local authorities, and we also have really intensive and quite widespread engagement with tenants, and we've been doing that for some time now, the whole of the duration up till the introduction of the new consumer standards and our new inspection regime. And what we find is that actually tenants are very well aware of the regulator and how we what our judgments are and what they mean. What you also find is that providers themselves, whenever they get a judgment, good or bad, will publicise it on their own websites as
Just
well.
on Lewis's particular point, the onus is on stakeholders, tenants, members of parliament, councillors to find out. There is no mechanism for them being informed.
The alert would be the key way for them to always be kept up to speed with that. I think one of the things that would be quite practically difficult for us, particularly with tenants, is how do we notify tenants? There's obviously, we couldn't have the address and names of every tenant in the country. That would be absolutely impossible. And there are GDPR considerations with that as well. We do have an expectation, one of our, as part of our standards, of providers themselves, that they will engage with their stakeholders. They will notify whether it's a local authority, whether it's their tenants themselves. Part of our standards.
Their expectation, not requirement. So if a local authority received a really good report, they'd want to shout and scream about it. If they received a poor one, what's the likelihood of them informing their tenants, stakeholders, external partners?
The people who, a lot of the people who do sign up to our alerts are kind of media outlets, including local media outlets.
Essentially, it's the press that inform, because I think about some of the judgments
I think
we've
there's
seen.
a number of routes through which it becomes public. But what we don't find is that, I mean, I can take this away, but what we don't find is that stakeholders are unaware of judgments, good or bad, actually in particular bad, because that's when we get absolutely inundated with local press queries as follow-ups to where there's been a poor outcome, a poor judgment. So it does tend to, it gets out there quite actively.
Sorry, just
mindful of time. Very, very quickly.
Would you agree that if there was a requirement on housing associations to communicate the outcome to all of their tenants, that would drive up their standards even further?
I think in terms of driving up their standards, we're working really hard to make sure that that's been done in any event. And one of the standards that we've strengthened considerably with the introduction of the new consumer standards is the tenant empowerment, involvement and accountability standard. So we do expect providers to be engaging with their tenants on a very regular basis, and that would include, it's not specifically set out as a specific requirement to communicate a change in grading to them, but that's certainly something that we would expect and test when we're going out and inspecting them. How do they communicate with tenants? What are their engagement mechanisms? How are they responding to feedback from tenants? It's a key element of the new consumer standards and what we test when we're doing those inspections, including talking to tenants, tenant groups when we go out and do that inspection.
But would you agree that if it was required, it would help to push them even further on that journey?
If I may, I'll go away and double check the exact wording of our consumer standard, and if I'll write to you.
Nashaba, thank you.
Thank you. Just a very, I think, quick question really, just again on that housing delivery point. How confident are you, given some of the changes that have come through to planning rules through the government that are proposed, that they will lead to the government fulfilling its objective of the biggest wave of social and council housing, house building in a generation?
To me in the first instance?
I think probably more to Neil and Chris actually for that one. Yes.
I'm not sure we've got any significant increase on what came before yet, so I think we're still waiting for the outcome of the spending review to find out what the funding is going to be over the medium term to support social and affordable housing. in terms of land supply, obviously land supply is intended to increase through the planning reforms, and that will improve developer contributions to Section 106 affordable housing. So those things will add up, but I think that the biggest factor is what's the scale of the new affordable homes programme.
I think I would just add, in the interest of time, I think what we can see is that if we're going to deliver more affordable homes, and specifically more homes for social rent, we need to grow the overall size of the pie. So that without doubt, I think the proposals on planning are pro-development that will help, but we do need to see action on the demand side and with regards to growth to get that going in order to make sure that there are more sites being built out which will have more affordable homes on them.
I'll just add to bring back the points from the previous panel that the financial capacity of housing associations is fundamental to achieving that goal.
Thank you very much. Just finally, it may be that you'll have to write to us, Fiona. You'll remember the predecessor committee's report on the RHH, and essentially your response back was that you felt that the regulator was already covering most of this. Just in light of some of the questions we've asked, do you currently engage with housing associations on their feedback on the assessments and investigations? And if so, what's the mechanism? Or is that something that you could probably write to us as a committee about?
I can certainly write to you, but yes, absolutely we engage with them. Whenever we're grading them, we will talk through with them the reasons we think we've arrived at the grade that we've arrived at. We'll look at sort of gap analysis, give them an opportunity to respond. But if a provider is at either G2 or C2 or below, G2 or below, we expect them to be undertaken, and I've talked already extensively about viability, we expect them to be taking action to get back to G1 or to get up to C1 in due course, and we will engage with them throughout that period. It's very different, I think, to something like an Ofsted inspection where they'll go in and then they'll go back again however many years, 4 years later. We will engage throughout in terms of their improvement plans and that the work that they're undertaking to regain a G1 or a C1 grading.
Okay, thank you. And we may write to you further in response to why you felt that the regulator didn't need to take any action on the predecessor's report on the suitability and finances, especially in light of some of the challenges the housing associations have highlighted.
I think we have taken action, but very happy to write to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for attending this morning. Order.